Welcome to all the participants in this second FSR online debate, the second online debate of our joint project with the European Commission's DG Energy devoted to sector coupling, to exploring the issues, the important themes linked to sector coupling. As you know, we had the very first online debate on September 11th, and it was entirely devoted to discussing on a gas terminology, a possible terminology for gases, to identify all the different types of gases that are emerging or are already in the European gas market these days. What we will be discussing today is a very important theme, gas infrastructure. We are going to explore, with the help of our panelists, whether the gas infrastructure is ready or not, or partially ready for these very important changes linked to sector coupling. So, of course, we will not, the scope of this online debate is not to come up with the solution, which is good for everybody, but it's mainly to explore if there are issues that need to be discussed, need to be brought to the table, if there is something that for some reason has escaped us, and we can do this only with your help, so not only with our panelists, but also with the help of your of the participants, of your active participation. So I invite you already since now to use the chat box that you see here below. You are very welcome to write any question that you would like the panelists to answer in the course of the debate. And I also remind you that this online debate, just like the previous one, will be entirely recorded, and then it will be posted on our website, so you will have the chance to re-watch it whenever convenient to you. Enough from my side, and I give the floor immediately to the moderator of the second online debate, Andris Peebalgs, Senior Fellow, Part-Time Professor at the Florence School of Regulation. Andris, the floor is entirely yours. Happy debate.
Thank you very much. I think all of us a bit followed this time UN Climate Summit from New York, and somehow I got a rather uneasy feeling with this gas sector. I got a very, very strong messages. One is definitely from youth, and such an angry message that definitely demonstrates that there is some split in generations, and usually pragmatic approach perhaps is not anymore politically so good. But also the factology is that emissions from fossil fuels are increasing continuously. In 2018 there could be 2% increase in emissions from fossil fuels. So that means that at least what we can see is a business that was until now trying to deal is not anymore sustainable. I think at least in Europe we can't live that nothing has happened. For the European Union we have had a debate, and it was based on the understanding that gas could do a lot for switching coal out and saving emissions, that also keeping gas infrastructure could provide for a lot of economic savings. But it seems that this is not enough to have such a type of debate. And what could I assume what need to happen next year? We need really to deliver the gas that is cleaner, that has less CO2 emissions, and that would mean in different places of the EU injection or of hydrogen or of renewable gas or other way of clean gas or low carbon gas. And this could happen only if the networks are well ready for this, and also some other factors that need to be taken into account. So the purpose of today's debate is really network ready for such a type of process in a very close future, or we need to do some adjustment. So it's not any more philosophical debate, but really very concrete debate. And I have very excellent experts with me. I have Ann Boersma from andTSO, who is business area manager. I have Markus Krug from E-Control, Deputy Head of Gas Department, its Energy Control, Austria. I have Doug Wood, Chairman of the Gas Committee from EFET, Energy Traders, and I have Ignacio Asenjo from DG Energy, who is also joining our debate and will try also to contribute to this debate. The first question I would like to start with is to Anne and also to Markus. Gas industry has operated network with natural gas so many years that we don't, I think as a normal consumers, we even don't care about the standards. We just expect that gas will be delivered, there will be safety, and etc. So what happens if there are by far more diverse injections in the gas network of different type of gases? Is gas network ready for this, or we need to do some adjustments? So what would happen if we have in Germany injections of different gas in one part and another part something completely different? What standards are there and what needs to be adjusted, or nothing should be adjusted, just inject? So Anne, please start going on.
Yes, Andres, can you hear me?
Yes, we do. We do.
Good. Yeah, so to answer your question, first of all, I would like to mention that from andTSO we see the development of what we call the hybrid energy system, which consists of both the carriers of electricity and gases. And both carriers, we see them becoming more and more decarbonized and renewable. So this holds for electricity, is recognized by everybody, and this also holds for gases that also can do the same. Now, on the gas side of this system, we see three different parallel pathways that could emerge. The first one, we call it's biomethane with the carbon capture and storage, so it's based on methane. Second one is based on blending of methane and hydrogen, so with a certain amount of hydrogen. And the third pathway is based on pure hydrogen. And again, it is not a certain order in time, but it is at one place one pathway could develop, at another place another one, or also in some systems combinations of the pathways could develop. So this is what we see for how to say to position the different gases. Now, if I take a closer look at what these gases are, for example, the biomethane. The biomethane is actually, it's quite similar to the natural gas that we all know. So there the operation does not pose any particular challenge. Now let's have a look at the hydrogen, what is called the green or the blue hydrogen, being decarbonized. Yeah, that is of course newer. What I can say is two things. First of all, in some networks there is already some experience with the hydrogen in the network, either with a limited blend, or also there is some experience with pure hydrogen pipelines. So but this is, so it's happening already, but certainly what we need is a further assessment EU-wide of the infrastructure readiness to accept either such blend or such pure hydrogen. So an andTSO is working on that. Now the question whether the TSOs could operate such different gas qualities, so say these different pathways in parallel and next to each other, I would like to refer to what we already see now, how this is done in the Netherlands, in Germany, France, Belgium, with the operation of the two different gas qualities, which are called low calorific and high calorific, stemming from the different upstream production. So these countries and the TSOs in the countries, they already operate the gas system with different gas qualities in the system, and so this is possible. Now, if I go into the question of this blend, so one of the pathways, often people ask what could be, how much could be blended. Well, I cannot give you the number yet, but I only can say that we are now working with the TSO, all our members, the TSOs, to define a reasonable threshold of the hydrogen content, with the aim to maintain the EU-wide gas market. So that, and we will come to the market question later, but to be able to transport such blends across IPs, across borders, it is necessary that there is some, common approach to this blending. Now, as a last remark, I would like to say that in our upcoming TYNDP 2020 edition, expected next year, we will devote a chapter to the topic of having several gas qualities in the EU gas infrastructure, and what this could mean for the system assessment. So it means that also on this TYNDP, which is an EU-wide document, we will address this topic of several gas qualities. For the moment, I would like to leave it here, but if you have any further questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Markus, I would basically ask the same question to you. I have been recently in Austria and I was quite impressed. First of all, climate change questions have been nearly the most important in political debate for new elections. But second, in Baumgarten, when you visit its natural gas facility, people talk a lot about biomethane, hydrogen, so it seems that there is some type of readiness of such a type of process. It was not desperation, natural gas or nothing else. How do you see this network readiness from your experience?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Andres. Can you hear me as well? Yes, I hope, everybody. Well, let me first maybe say a few things about also the European level, where we as CR have been sort of very much thinking about the regulatory challenges also related to these renewable gases and sector coupling. And we have done, as you know, maybe the study last year with DNVGL on the future role of gas. And this year we have consulted on a number of questions which are very similar to the ones that we're discussing today. And I can also maybe share a little bit about our first impression and sort of what the feedback was here. I mean, I think I very much share regarding the question of blending hydrogen. I think here we are at the stage where it's maybe for the overall system maybe too early to really say what the right level of mixture could be. And so I fully support what Anne said. I think here a common European approach to assessing this in a comprehensive manner, I think is a right step to do next. And I think these preparatory assessments are needed. I think what is important for us is, of course, also to ensure that this flow of gas across the borders is ensured. And I mean, but we should not also preclude sort of certain member states going further or having more ambitious targets with this. So I think there needs to be some sort of flexibility as well in this. And ultimately, I think it's then up to them and maybe the interoperability network code where all these these rules should then be laid down. But I think we're quite some steps before that. I mean, what concerns Austria, yes. I mean, here the gas industry is very much adopting this greening the gas strategy. So I think they foresee, at least for the residential heating sector, there was a study that with biomethane, actually the demand of the residential heating sector could be sort of substituted with biomethane and some hydrogen as well by 2050. And now, of course, the question is about the readiness of the infrastructure. I mean, from a regulatory point of view, what we are currently very much looking at is the focus also on the customer, with more and more biomethane and different gas qualities injecting into the network. You also have to deal with the differences in energy content. So I think we have currently quite an inflexible way of handling this and also for billing the customer. But from a regulatory point of view, I think we need to be much more flexible, or a system whereby these different gas qualities which are injected all over the networks will be then sort of also correctly billed towards the final customer. Yeah, that's for now.
Thank you, Doug. You without trading and without selling the commodities, there is no hopes. And as Wim was saying, basically we will have unique situation because LNG networks have been basically separate networks and only they have been connected to upgrade the gas. So it will be different. Is it possible to trade different gas that flows in the same network, like a hydrogen and there is gas or different content? What could be perspectives from the trader's point of view of such a situation, or you would say it's nearly impossible to do it?
I want to pick on a point within your introduction, and I think it's worthwhile remembering and setting this in a much wider market context as well, because the implication was that gas needs to decarbonise or it will lose its place within the provision of energy within the EU at least, or worldwide. And the implication is, or else something else will happen. We will go for full electrification. But that seems to imply that full electrification can be delivered, that within the same time frame it's going to be possible to build out electricity grids to encompass electrification of heat, that we're just going to magic away the solution to electricity storage to create the seasonality out of renewable energy, intermittent renewable energy, and there's a whole wider range of challenges that we are faced with. So it's not. I think it's not just a question of, well, is gas? Is it going to be a pure electrification argument, or does gas have some role in creating that transition? If we can envisage a way forward. And the question then becomes, well, we can how best to deliver a decarbonisation agenda economically and effectively. And when we bear in mind what we have achieved with the development of gas markets and electricity markets over the last 20 years, then to maintain the price signals somehow so that we have significant amounts of investment from speculative investors and not the only types of investment happening under regulated conditions, which may lead very much to suboptimal economic decisions, much higher levels of socialization and much higher levels of overall cost. So it's absolutely crucial to this that we maintain some market signals for operators within those markets. And the other thing we'd say is Anna set out some three scenarios of, well, we may have a biomethane or a hydrogen methane blend or pure hydrogen. But again, those aren't the only possibilities. So when I answer your question, it's only to assume that scenario is going to go ahead, and we are talking about those three. But there are much wider possibilities, because we haven't addressed, and maybe we will later in this debate, the full costs of decarbonisation when you consider also the levels of investment required in appliances and electrical consuming equipment and grid enhancements and so on. So with that preamble, it's can you trade these things? Anna also brought up a very happy scenario of what has been achieved within the high-cal, low-cal mix, and certainly for small volumes of hydrogen, say up to the 20% that's being trialled in Hamburg, then to pay the TSO to take away the problem and just say we're going to continue to trade kilowatt hours and supply kilowatt hours to consumers, although some industrial consumers may have a much clearer vested interest in understanding what the chemical constituency of the gas they're receiving is. But we can envisage two markets emerging, one for energy and one for environmental characteristics, that encourage people to move towards hydrogen and to invest in hydrogen and to find ways to recover the incremental costs of investing in hydrogen. The starting point for this other market of environmental characteristics, however, is very diversified at the moment. We have seen that the ETS has attempted to capture a measure of carbon abatement, but has been diluted by a series of other measures that are happening both at national and international levels, such that it has never really produced a carbon price that has stimulated investment. So if we were to be serious about creating a traded market for environmental characteristics, and one that doesn't fragment the achievements of the single internal gas market that we have into a series of disconnected national markets with different gas quality specifications, different access terms, different carbon taxes or subsidies or forms of environmental encouragement, then we run the risk of having a system that we cannot readily understand is going to be a cheap and affordable system or an efficient way of delivering these things. So yes, in the short term, where we have hydrogen blended as part of a grid, we could see two products emerging, so one for energy and one for environmental characteristics. Then you say in the longer term, do the markets for methane and the markets for hydrogen separate? So you start having two separate markets for energy, one for natural gas or methane, and one for hydrogen, and one for environmental characteristics. And this is the one that's difficult to envisage right now. You could predict that as perhaps something that exists in 30 years' time. But how we get there is very much dependent on the question of the grids, because you can't go 90% methane, 10% hydrogen, then 80-20, 70-30, 60-40, 50-50, as far as we're aware that at some point, and it may be around 20%, you suddenly split off and you may have to consider having separate hydrogen grids. And at that point, you would need a separate hydrogen market to justify that. And right now, we don't easily envisage how that's going to happen, and this is where I think there's a lot more discussion and a lot more work needed to be undertaken to understand some of the physical and operational issues that would underpin such a market.
Ignacio, now I'd like to ask you a very difficult question actually, because what I heard now there could be more than two approaches. One is you just go very chaotic, where the people just would like to inject cleaner gas in the market, in the grids they do this, and then the other is rather strong European-driven approach to this process. What would be your preference, hearing what your colleagues are saying and what you know about the situation? Ignacio.
Yes. So I come from the energy networks unit. So we're working especially on energy infrastructure, and I would like to share some insights from the results of a study that we just ordered on the issue of this debate, which is specifically the impact for the gas infrastructure of having high levels of renewable gases or high levels of renewable hydrogen and biomethane and synthetic methane in the network. And the first thing I'd like to say quickly from so this study was carried out by Trinomics, and it will be public quite soon. So of course the conclusions of the study are not necessarily taken up by the Commission as such, but I think they are interesting to share because I think the study they have made is quite thorough. And one of the issues they address is the issue of blending, precisely the issue of injection of various gases in the network, and the role that this can play in the decarbonization process for our economy. And their conclusions are quite skeptical about the role that blending can play in the long term or even in the medium term, simply because there are a lot of technical challenges to that. There are technical challenges. In particular, one of the difficult issues is how to ensure that you have a permanent and a steady injection into the system, and that operationally network that has different kinds of gases blended, is operationally not so robust as a network where you have a single kind of gas, be it methane or hydrogen. And that, of course, for the end-user appliances is a great challenge also. So they seem to be much more optimistic about the role of having separate networks, fully closed, fully hydrogen networks, and this would make a greater contribution to decarbonization. They also consider that the contribution of blending to decarbonization is not very cost efficient, and that with injections at the level of 10 or 20% in terms of cost, you don't decarbonize a lot. And so the blending issue is an interesting one, and of course it needs to be regulated EU-wide, and we need to have common standards EU-wide for that. But in the long term or even medium term, it's not clear that it will really play an important role, because the technical and operational challenges are very important. Now, maybe to your question, it's not sure that we can really choose whether you have a really decentralized approach or more centralized one. I tend to think personally, from what I have read so far on this issue, that because of biomethane and because of the role of the electrolyzers to produce power to gas and to inject renewable hydrogen into the grid, we'll have a very decentralized system coming up, and that will have challenges that are comparable to the challenges that we saw in the electricity system when we start to have the renewables deployment. So indeed, we need to have a new relationship probably between the distribution system and transmission system that needs to develop, that the DSOs, the distribution system operators, will have to have a very different role, where so far they were essentially receiving imported gas and distributing it. Now they will have to start thinking about issues like reverse flow, the relation to the TSO, maybe feeding into the TSO or consuming the biomethane or hydrogen that they produce locally. And they will have to plan much more than they have so far. So there will be a lot of challenges to the decentralized approach, but I tend to think that indeed it will be a very decentralized system, and that this will have, in the long term, and this is an issue that has been also addressed in the study, in the long term this will change totally, not totally, but at least largely, the structure of the gas infrastructure itself, where today we have a gas infrastructure that is built mostly to import gas and distribute it. And in the future, we'll need to have a different gas infrastructure that will have a lot of injection points distributed around Europe, leading to consumption points. Areas with very high potential to produce hydrogen from renewable electricity or to produce biomethane, and areas that don't have that high potential and need to consume a lot. So you will maybe have new distribution of gas through the gas network at the European Union level. And then we will see what will be the role of imports. In this study, one of the boundary conditions was that it doesn't consider renewable gas imports, but of course we can still consider that as a possibility, a very real possibility. So we'll need to see what is the possibility for keep importing gas from outside the European Union that is actually decarbonized.
Let's start with Anna wanted to make a comment on what colleagues have said, so I saw he's nodding. So, Anne, please.
Yeah, the comment was on the contribution by Doug Wood. I think I'm happy to hear that he also sees this perspective of maintaining a European gas market, and being of the nature of being a gas kilowatt hour market, so the energy content. And indeed, like he, also we have been thinking, how could we have that, looking at different gases that come in, so partly being decarbonized, partly not yet, partly being hydrogen or partly being methane. So what I wanted to say is we are interested to understand what the concept of tradable guarantees of origin could bring there. For example, and I think Doug mentioned it as well, a guarantee of origin to capture the value of being decarbonized. that is already in discussion. But we are aware that the pure hydrogen, for some process industry, it has clearly a different market value, and not only being the energy content. So as an additional concept, you could think of that you could have a kind of a guarantee of origin-like thing to capture the value of being at an exit point delivered as pure hydrogen. So that would mean that in the market it is bought as a kilowatt hour, so for the energy content. However, if a customer operates an exit point where he can take pure hydrogen, then that could be somehow given some value as well through a kind of a guarantee of origin. This was my contribution just to show that we share this idea that we should try to maintain one gas market over Europe as much as possible, and that maybe there are some concepts that could help in that.
Now to the questions. One question that I remember by heart, it's a rather simple area. Markus was already mentioning, it's final consumer. So different type of gases and final consumer. We have appliances, they are. Where are the risks or limits in this respect? Markus?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, what I was referring to before is more the commercial side. So let's say, as we were talking about kilowatt hours and different types of renewable gases that the customer gets from the billing point of view, from what he consumes, the right amount of energy. But you're right, I mean, what I was also talking before is the technical aspect, which is of course carefully now looking at the whole system, so meaning from the gas infrastructure down to the customer appliances, and I think there is the most critical point on how much. Yeah.
Markus, we lost you. I don't know what happened, but well, if I may then to ask another question, it's to Anne, Doug, and Ignacio. Basically, it's one of the questions leads to it, and then there is also an comment that I received before the platform. If there is uncertainty about gas, why should then we invest in new gas facilities, new gas infrastructure? Do we need to do this? Who would start? Doug, perhaps you, then Anne, and then Ignacio. If you can do it very briefly, please.
Sure, and I've read some of the recent reports questioning whether projects of common interest are still valid, given that many of these projects may be, 5, even 10 years away from even investment, particularly with regard to some of the projects in Eastern Europe. In which case, what lifetime will they have before we hit the decarbonisation targets before 2050? And if we impose a depreciation period of 20 years or 10 years on these, do they still make sense economically? Particularly if they can't be repurposed to hydrogen. And I think there's still a lot of question around what assumptions we have underlying future investments. But that still doesn't negate the need for us to be able to optimize across the existing asset streams that we have. And this is where market signals, and the right market signals, and the development of the right instruments is essential to deliver an efficient outcome. And I think that this also speaks a little bit to Anna's comments about GOOs, guarantees of origin, which is one of the voluntary instruments that was foreseen in the Renewable Energy Directive, but still is unlikely to be all-encompassing. It gets us on an initial path where people can demonstrate that they are showing environmental responsibility to their customers. But if we want to achieve a level of decarbonisation with significant amounts of investment that's required, then more robust mechanisms are necessary, and a better understanding of the interaction between those mechanisms to avoid some of the problems experienced by the ETS will necessarily be built into the market design. And this is where I think, to hand over to Ignacio, this is where I think there's a crucial role for European authorities to make, to try to keep national initiatives aligned so that we don't disintegrate the European energy market, and we ensure that any national schemes or national initiatives that take place can work in a more pan-European framework.
Ignacio, Ran, who will make the comment on this?
Well, shall I start still? Yes? Is this okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, Doug, thank you for these comments. And I would say, if you ask the question, what is still needed? Should we still invest in the gas infrastructure with a view to the decarbonized future? I think that if we look at the current status, the gas infrastructure already has delivered on two of the other pillars of the EU energy policy, and that is on the market functioning and on the security of supply. So I would say that is good news that we want to make people aware of. With the introduction of the network codes on the gas side and with the implementation of that, with the necessary infrastructure now in place, I would say that both the market functioning and security of supply are now almost over all of Europe, say at the level that we are looking for. Indeed, like Doug mentioned as well, in Eastern Europe there is maybe some more requirements for that, but overall we succeeded in bringing that about. Now, the third pillar, being the sustainability, has got so far much less attention on the gas side. It was not included in the third package. Of course, everybody now sees that from the gas side, people are working hard to also get the sustainability right. And that could mean that if there are certain needs in terms of energy transition related projects, that could require and also warrant some further investment in the gas infrastructure. Not being fossil infrastructure, but being simply infrastructure to transport and store gases, also decarbonized gases. Now, so this is one thing. This could be a need for further investments. Now, one other thing is Doug's remark that guarantees of origin will not bring everything we are looking for. I would like to refer to, say, a view that I heard lately. And that is that, yes, the third package is very good at delivering market access, so market functioning. However, it is not maybe yet completely suited to steer the investments, which is a different thing. And clearly what we are looking for here is that for the new energy system to be decarbonized, so both on the electricity and on the gas side, that there are a lot of investments involved. So whether there is a need for further measures in that regard, that's indeed something that should be considered. So maybe I leave my comments here. Yes.
Ignacio, please.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, maybe so on the first question of the infrastructure and the role of infrastructure, I'm coming back to the study that was mentioned before that was carried out by Economics, and of course they look very carefully into the issue of repurposing. So repurposing existing pipelines and network at large that we use for natural gas today, can it be used for hydrogen, especially 100% hydrogen, of course biomethane, that doesn't seem to be a problem, but can it be used for 100% hydrogen in the future? And their reply seems to be maybe cautious, yes, and that the investments that it requires, because it would require investment in specific equipments, probably not the pipelines themselves, although here I have to point out that it's particularly true for polyethylene pipelines. So the most recent generation of pipelines that are more or less half of the existing pipelines in the European Union, for those, there seems to be no problem to move into hydrogen. but of course, then there would be investments needed, in particular in metering equipment and other kinds of equipment, which are relatively modest compared to the investments that would be needed, for instance, in electricity transmission or other areas in other scenarios. So there seems to be a role for existing gas infrastructure with some investments needed in the future of decarbonization of the energy system, according to this study. Although, while we move progressively to 100% hydrogen networks, we will probably need new investments in new networks specifically for hydrogen because of localization issues. That's one issue. The other issue that was mentioned by Mr. Wood here is about, of course, the PCIs, the projects of common interest, and trans-European networks in general. Of course, as Anne has mentioned, we are making efforts to integrate fully the sustainability issue in the assessment and the cost-benefit analysis of the gas infrastructure projects that are submitted to us. We are actually now conducting a study about how to develop a future-proof sustainability criterion to assess gas infrastructure projects, actually, for the future, and how to ensure that they are adapted for conversion to renewable gases in the future, or decarbonized gases in the future. So we are taking this issue of decarbonization in the gas network more and more seriously in our selection process for the PCIs. That's for sure. But as Anna mentioned, in the still recent past, and also in the treaty itself, the main criteria for the 10E and the PCIs were more on the side of security of supply and internal market. But now we are moving towards this criterion of decarbonization. And I'd like to point out that NSOC and NSOE are working together in a system, in a joint scenario, and also in specific projects that would contribute to decarbonization as well in the framework of the work they are doing on TYNDP 2020.
Okay, thank you, Ignacio. Marcus, we lost you on the final consumption, how does it go? But I will rephrase my question, because we talk about hydrogen delivery. So one issue is definitely, could existing pipes also serve pure hydrogen? Gazprom says that if you will make a demand of hydrogen, they will send up hydrogen. That answers some of the questions that we got about external supplies. But final consumer perhaps is less flexible than the supplier. So what are the limits there? Should we perhaps then not speak about so much hydrogen, but synthetic methane or biomethane in the pipes, and hydrogen is something completely different? So if you go from the point of view of final consumer, how you would see this process then?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I mentioned before in the beginning sort of the greening the gas strategy here in Austria, and I think what I mentioned is that for the residential heating sector, so really the household customers which are connected to the lowest pressure level of the distribution networks, I think there the idea, at least here in Austria, is to use biomethane, which is very similar to the gas quality that is currently transported and also that is used by these final customers, households. So this could be replaced by that. And then there are some other customers like industry. We have this steel producer, first, which already now is looking into hydrogen, green hydrogen for their processes. And what I actually see is rather more a decoupling maybe from the levels of the network. So we will maybe see then for the residential heating household customers more maybe biomethane, more decentralized injections, and sort of the existing networks being used. But for large industrial clusters, customers, I think there more and more there will be probably also purely hydrogen pipelines being converted to or built. But this of course goes then hand in hand with sort of the change in in the process input for these customers. So once they switch from, I don't know, coal to hydrogen, then this would be necessary. So I see a little bit of decoupling from sort of maybe the low pressure networks with different customers for the heating, still using more biomethane, and maybe other customers more switching to hydrogen. At least based on the Austrian discussion.
Thank you, Markus. I see that we moved away from the technical networks basically for more policies, and I think it seems, at least for me, and I will now try to put this more political question in. Basically, sector coupling and different type of gases very much could be from two approaches. One is, it is somebody injects, being paid, that is better carbon footprint. And the other one is very planned switch from the carbon natural gas towards low carbon gas or renewable gas. How we should proceed? It's like a chicken and egg problem. So should we just allow the process, and that warns that we could kill existing market from this, or we should really try to see how could be final demand and then steer towards it stage by stage. So it's really seems that it's not so much technical characteristics of the networks now, but really the policies is the most serious issue. Who would start? Doug, perhaps, if you understood what I mean by this question.
Yes, and I'm afraid I don't have a specific answer to it. And what the balance is. Certainly, as you would expect, a traders' organisation say, we believe very strongly that without clear market signals, the costs of the transition and the likelihood of investing in the wrong technologies and the potential for being locked into the wrong path is much greater. And that's the difficulty of when you have politicians picking winners in specific technologies without a more dynamic involvement of the market in doing that. And that's not only within gas technologies, but across energies. And that's why we are putting some work into trying to understand what would be the impact of particular types of policies, whether it's a taxation of subsidies, whether it's at the point of production or the point of consumption, how to bring together different national approaches. Could you have a kind of exchange rate mechanism between different certificates that in different countries that have received different levels of support prior to moving to a common currency which recognises a common form of, for example, carbon abatement. So there is definitely a role of the market, and we are trying to find ways and to find a market design that will unlock the greatest potential for the market and help policymakers, help to guide them to make sensible market-based decisions, rather than in a complete panic just plumping for specific technologies and hoping that turns out to be the best as the only way of attempting to meet.
And what is your views?
Difficult for us for andTSO to answer. I think what we as infrastructure and TSO association, what we clearly want to demonstrate is how we see the potential functioning of the infrastructure in the future. So as I said, the hybrid system, both electricity and gas, being more robust and more affordable. Strictly speaking, the infrastructure itself is not in position to generate or to produce any kind of gas. I mean, there is a gray area where you could say we could be involved in conversion of one gas quality to another, and you could explore how that could be used for this purpose. But in general, we say infrastructure wants to be ready for the decarbonized and renewable gases, to take them on board at all the injection points and to bring them to all the customers. So that is the part that we are certainly say responsible for. But the specific policy question, whether policy should wait and see until it happens, or whether policy should somehow incentivize this, well, I could say what my personal opinion is, but as infrastructure, we try to refrain from this policy choice, I think.
Ignacio, please.
I think it's if you want to know what's the position, of course, of the European Commission. Of course, we do believe in market signals, and we do believe in trying to erase distortions that exist today as much as possible, and to create a level playing field also between different fuels with the different solutions for flexibility, for including demand response, etc. So I think if you look at what we have done for the electricity market, there you will find part of the answer, and that creates, at least creates the possibility for a very decentralized system. So I think we need at least to create the conditions for even relatively small actors to be able to inject into the gas grid renewable or decarbonized gases, and that potentially can create a very decentralized system. This doesn't mean, of course, that at the same time you could have other actors who are large actors who would be intervening with very large-scale initiatives, bringing in gas, renewable or decarbonized gas as well. But from our point of view as regulators, it's the important thing is to create the conditions for all actors to be there and for have certainty in the investments. And this, I think, will tend to lead to a rather decentralized approach. But only time will say.
Of course, if I may, because we need soon to conclude this debate. Well, I also see that we have choices in it. And it's basically less related to existing infrastructure because it's more political choices. And coming from the member countries that would like very much to drive the climate change, how do you see it? Is decentralized approach is the most promising one, or really try to build some logic, long-term futures, those moving from, let's say, natural gas to mix a natural gas with hydrogen to 10% blend, and then to clean hydrogen all over the European Union, because I don't see any questions that is basically technical in nature. It's really more political choices questions, and also final users question, because they should at the end of the day agree what is being given to them.
Yeah, I would like to share a little bit. We in Austria, we have been discussing a hydrogen strategy for the last months, and it's close to being finalized now. And I think what became clear, because we started in this debate in Austria with the idea that we could produce renewable hydrogen here in Austria and sort of be self-sufficient. But I think we, looking at all the sectors and all the challenges, we came to the conclusion, well, this is not feasible. So we need to import. We need imports. As we import energy now, we will also maybe have to then import larger quantities of renewable or blue hydrogen in the future. And then of course, I think there is some sort of a need for cooperation cross-border again, or some larger picture, because I think if we really export this from outside the EU, import this from outside the EU, and then within the EU to some markets, we need some coherent approach here. So this is I think one lesson learned, and and I think there will be somehow a decoupling, as I said before, between maybe still customers more than on bioMethane, and sort of being maybe more decentralized within member states. But on the other hand, maybe larger imports of blue or renewable hydrogen through really transmission type of networks, and maybe then separate infrastructure for that. And
if I may, the very last question to all of you: is hydrogen the final goal? I would say green hydrogen the final goal of decarbonization of our gas system. I will start with Doug, Anne, Ignacio, and Marcus.
Well, we don't know. I think that there's so much of this debate is around the unknown unknowns. That this is one potential carrier. We still don't have clear ideas of the costs of different routes. But this is going to be a learning exercise between now and 2050. I don't think we can state with any certainty now that hydrogen is the end.
Anna, what is your views?
Okay. Yeah, to answer your question, what gases? First of all, I would like to mention that andTSO and andTSO, so Gas and Electricity TSO associations, we are preparing jointly the scenarios for the TO-NDP. And in these scenarios, we explore three different approaches. One is close to the current NECPs, the National Energy and Climate Plans. But we also will have two approaches more related to the COP21 carbon budget, the 1.5 degree. And there we have two tastes, so to say, and I think that Ignacio already referred to that. One is more looking for decentralized injections, and the other one is more looking for the large-scale injections, what we are currently more used to, and then with transit. So this is to illustrate that in the scenario preparation and also in the TO-NDP, we would like to be ready for whatever of these possible futures could happen, because indeed we don't know. Now, as for the potentials for the different gases, on the gas side we include all potentials that we can identify, and that means specifically the biomethane. In each country there are certain potentials, and we use that to a certain extent in the scenarios. We also use the potential for the green hydrogen, and of course that's dependent on the renewable generation as well as the power to gas capacities, and that will take time to build out. And then a third potential that is important to bridge, say, the decarbonization need is the potential for the blue hydrogen. In other words, based on natural gas and then being somehow decarbonized with some technology. I would say our current experience in preparing the scenarios is that only with a combination of all potentials that we have, so both on the biomethane side as on the different hydrogen technologies, that we can make the necessary speed to stay within the carbon budget as good as possible. Now, what it could mean for the longer term, that was your actual question on this. It could very well be that in the medium term, both biomethane and blue hydrogen make a good start, and that the green hydrogen takes slightly more time to grow. In the longer term, the green hydrogen could become bigger, but still, if there is a potential for the biomethane, I don't see that we should exclude that. So it could even say allow, if you would capture the carbon from using biomethane post-combustion, that is even a negative carbon emission. So, in short, summarizing, I think we need all the potentials for the renewable and decarbonized gases, and in the longer term it could be based both on renewable methane as well as on hydrogen.
Ignacio and Marcus, you each have only 30 seconds, please.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'll be very fast. So the question is hydrogen, I think it's too early to say still today. According to the study, Trinomics study that I mentioned before, they put a lot of confidence on hydrogen as an important role for the future decarbonization of the use of gas in the European Union. Just to say quickly why, because hydrogen can be produced from renewable electricity through power to gas, while to produce methane in that way you need an additional process that is called methanation that is still quite expensive and energy intensive, while power to gas is already energy intensive. And at the same time, the potential for biomethane in the European Union is there, but relatively limited compared to the demand of gas. So they put a lot of trust on the role of hydrogen in the future. But of course, it's too early to say, and of course, us as European Commission, we need to stick to our technology neutrality, and also I would say even gas neutrality in our approach. The important thing is to decarbonize, and we should probably let markets decide which is the best gas.
Markus.
Yeah, very briefly, I think the same applies. So we don't want to pick winners. I think personally it will be a mix, also with blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, and biomethane, of course. And what we want to do is to apply a dynamic approach also to regulation. So let the markets develop, and then when certain criteria are met, we may have to then apply some regulation.
Yeah, well, I would conclude saying after the debates that we have, it was broad debate, but it's definitely not the technical barriers we have at this stage in the injection. I think it is a market structures that we need really to look upon how to promote more greener or more cleaner gas being in, and also on demand side. I think that's where our attention should be, because whatever our experts have told, it's not so much about the technical specification of the network. The risk definitely is Europe-wide market where we could lose something, but I assume that we need to be very proactive and start doing something already next year, because without real injection of hydrogen in the network and more injection of biomethane, I think gas sector will lose this credibility that it is also delivering for the fighting of climate change. I would stop here, and again I would thank Anne, Doug, Markus, and Ignacio, and Ilaria for introduction, and also everybody who joined us. I saw the question you typed, and I tried really to follow the spirit of your question. We are not, for example, in the situation where we should discuss, should we import hydrogen or not? We don't have such a level of consumption at this stage. I think we really need to design on strategy how to proceed and really to go there. And it should be mix of national strategies and European. So it's the most difficult approach that is possibly you could imagine, but I assume there is no other way around. So thank you very much again, and thank you for your time. I am sorry that we did not answer all the questions that you wanted us to answer, but I assume such a type of debates we need really to advance the whole case forward. And Ilaria?
Thank you very much. Just a final word. Thanks to the panelists, to you, Andres, very much for moderating a very interesting debate, and to the participants. Thanks also for your patience. The debate will continue. As you know, at the Madrid Forum, this is a point in the agenda on the second day, so we hope we will bring at least our 5-cent contribution to that debate, and it will be a long-lasting debate, it seems, but very interesting. Thank you very much to all.